specifically talking about these ancient tablets, which are, to me,
Yeah.
some of the most interesting things about ancient history.
What could terrify 90,000 people enough to abandon the surface of Earth? In 2021, restorers in Baghdad opened a sealed crate untouched since 1968 and found a tablet hidden beneath ordinary records. When experts translated it, they uncovered a detailed account of a massive underground evacuation, not from war, but from something waiting above. And according to the tablet, some of it may have never left. The crate that survived 3 wars. The crate was labeled Tel al-Hiba, 1968 season, unclassified material. Tel al-Hiba is the archaeological site of ancient Lagash, one of the largest urban centers of the 3rd millennium BCE, a Sumerian city of considerable size and documented sophistication. The excavations at the site in 1968 were interrupted by political crisis before the material recovered that season could be properly processed. The crates were sealed and shipped to the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, where they were placed in the basement and not revisited. What followed for those crates was a history that would have destroyed most fragile, ancient material. 3 wars passed over Baghdad. The 2003 looting of the Iraq Museum, during which tens of thousands of artifacts were stolen or destroyed, reached many of the museum's collections. Basement flooding in 2015 damaged significant quantities of stored material. The crate from Tel al-Hiba, 1968, survived all of it, sealed, unlabeled in any meaningful way, and sitting in storage for 53 years. When the Iraqi-Italian restoration team opened it in November 2021, they found 11 clay tablets inside. 10 of them were exactly what the label suggested: routine administrative records covering grain allocations, labor assignments, and temple supply inventories. Standard Sumerian bureaucratic material of the kind that fills museum collections worldwide. The 11th was different in every respect. It was larger and thicker than the others. Its text ran in 3 columns on both sides of the tablet, a format used for documents of significant length and complexity. The conservator, Marco de Gregorio, cleaned the salt crust from its surface carefully, photographed it in full, and sent the images to Iraqi State Board epigraphist Ali al-Hashimi that same day. Al-Hashimi began his transliteration that evening. 3 days later, he called the team leader. He was convinced he had made an error somewhere in his reading. The text was not describing anything he expected to find on a Lagash administrative tablet. It was not a temple ritual account. It was not a record of military action or city destruction. It was a detailed, structured administrative record of a mass evacuation of 90,000 people into a network of underground facilities, following a warning from scouts in response to something descending from above that the scribe classified as alive. No error was found. The evacuation. The first column of the tablet opens with an administrative term that al-Hashimi recognized immediately from other Sumerian records. The word ag is an established Sumerian administrative term for the gathering and relocation of people, used in contexts involving organized population movement rather than voluntary migration or military displacement. The word implies planning, authority, and a structured process. The number recorded in the first column is expressed in a unit called the sh, which equals 3,600 people. The tablet records 25 sh, which converts to exactly 90,000 individuals. This is not an approximate figure or a rounded estimate. It is a precise administrative count, the kind of number that appears in Sumerian records when someone has actually counted the people involved. The warning that triggered the evacuation came from a group the tablet identifies by a title that translates as those who see first. These were scouts or observers stationed at elevated positions, likely on the city walls or on observation platforms above the main structures of Lagash. The warning arrived with enough lead time for the population movement to be conducted in 3 distinct and organized phases rather than as a panic-driven flight. The first phase is called shudu in the tablet, which translates as the count of hands. It was a complete census of every household in the area, with families assigned to specific groups and each group assigned to a specific section of the underground network. The underground sites are referenced using a glyph that means sealed house beneath the earth. This is not language describing a natural cave or a temporary shelter. It is language describing a purpose-built facility. The second phase is called Bankur, meaning possessions moved down. Before a single person went underground, supplies were transferred first. The tablet records the quantities in detail: 14 gur of barley per family, where 1 gur is approximately 300 liters. With 25,000 households making the move, this represents approximately 7.5 million liters of grain transferred underground, enough to sustain 90,000 people for over a year without resupply from the surface. Grain, water, livestock, oil, seed, and bronze tools all went down before the people followed. The third phase carries a name that translates as the Great Doors were sealed. The sealing mechanism is described specifically. The doors were made of stone and designed to roll shut from the inside. The tablet calls them Narua Agol, meaning great stone mouths. They could not be opened from the surface. 17 separate entrances across the Lagash region were sealed simultaneously. The tablet's own language makes clear what this was not: a cave, a hiding place, an improvised shelter. This was infrastructure. It was pre-built, pre-provisioned, and ready. The question the tablet itself leaves open and does not attempt to answer is whether this infrastructure was constructed in response to this specific threat or had been maintained for generations against the possibility of the threat's return. What came down? The second column opens with a phrase that al-Hashimi identified as significant from his first reading. The term Antag-Gald translates as the great affliction descending from above. In standard Sumerian administrative texts, the word for affliction is namag, used for disasters, diseases, and divine punishments of various kinds. In this tablet, namag is modified by a grammatical marker called a determinative, a symbol placed before a word to indicate what category of thing it belongs to. The determinative used in this passage is the one reserved exclusively for living things. The scribe did not classify the affliction as a storm, a flood, a fire, a celestial event, or any other category of natural disaster. He classified it as alive. The physical description of the affliction that follows is detailed enough to be analyzed against known phenomena. It moved in waves across the land rather than as a single front. The verb used to describe its movement is da, which means to fly or to hover, not to walk, run, or flow. It produced a sound the scribe describes as nirgal, meaning a great wailing roar, and specifies that this sound caused animals to stampede and children to go silent. It did not destroy buildings or break walls. The structures of Lagash remained physically intact throughout the approach of the affliction. It emptied cities through its approach alone. The killing method is the detail that has generated the most private discussion among the 4 scholars who have read the tablet. The scribe uses the phrase ush bar razi, which translates as killed from the outside by extracting the life force. The people who died were not struck by any projectile. They were not burned. They were not drowned or crushed. Their bodies remained physically whole and externally undamaged. People died where they stood, where they sat, mid-stride in the street. Their breath was simply gone. The tablet then begins to describe what happened to the bodies after death, but that section of the text is damaged and only partially recoverable. What survives is enough to establish that the scribe considered the condition of the bodies significant enough to document. What the watchers saw through the shafts. The underground facilities where 90,000 people sheltered included ventilation shafts running to the surface. These shafts were too narrow to permit entry or exit, but wide enough to allow observation of fragments of sky and to allow sounds from the surface to reach the people below. The watchers assigned to monitor the surface through these shafts recorded what they observed across the days following the sealing of the great doors. During the first 3 days, the great wailing roar grew louder and then faded in cycles as though the affliction moved across the region in repeated passes rather than remaining stationary. Surface livestock died within hours of the sealing. The tablet records this with the specific word gindabush, meaning they fell as one simultaneously. On the 4th day, the roar stopped. The silence should have been the signal to open the doors. It was not. The watchers reported something through the ventilation shafts that generated serious argument among the people below about whether the surface was safe to return to. The light had changed. The scribe records the surface light as dalakur, a compound word that his own text appears to define, through context as brightness combined with wrongness. Not darkness, not an eclipse. The light was present, but it had a quality that the trained observers watching through the shafts recognized as indicating that the environment above had fundamentally changed. The population stayed underground for a period the tablet records as Etesh, which equals 3 months. The 3 attempts to return, when the population finally attempted to return to the surface, they did not send everyone up at once. A group the tablet identifies as Luzu, meaning the knowing men, were the designated scouts for this purpose. Trained observers with specific skills in assessment and reporting, these were the people the community trusted to go first and report accurately. 7 men went up in the first attempt. They reached the surface and were able to observe the landscape around the entrances. What they found was recorded by the scribe in specific terms. The fields were covered in sahar-dala, dust that shines, a fine luminous residue coating every surface they could see. The Tigris River had changed color to the shade of copper. Every standing structure in view was coated in the same luminous dust. The trees were stripped bare of leaves. There were no birds anywhere. There were no insects. The silence was complete. 3 of the 7 men became sick within hours of reaching the surface. The symptoms began with burning of the skin in areas that had been exposed to the open air. Vomiting followed, then rapid physical weakening, then confusion. The 4 men who remained healthy carried the sick back underground. The doors were sealed again. 2 of the 3 sick men died within days. The 3rd survived but lost his vision permanently. The 2nd and 3rd attempts produced the same results each time. Men who reached the surface developed the same progression of symptoms within hours. Burning skin, vomiting, rapid weakening, death within days. The number of volunteers decreased with each attempt. The scribe records the conclusion that the population reached after the 3rd attempt in plain administrative language. The surface had become the territory of the affliction. The affliction itself was no longer physically present above them, but whatever it had left behind had made the surface lethally toxic. What modern medicine recognizes. The 4 scholars who read the translation in January 2022 did not discuss the medical implications publicly. The private discussion that occurred among them is known only through what can be inferred from the communication records that subsequently became visible. The symptom progression described in the tablet maps onto a specific and well-documented medical syndrome. Burning of skin on exposed areas is called radiation erythema in modern medicine. Vomiting following the skin burns is the acute gastrointestinal phase of radiation sickness. Occurring as ionizing radiation damages the rapidly dividing cells of the digestive tract. Rapid systemic weakening following the gastrointestinal phase is consistent with high-dose ionizing radiation exposure, affecting multiple organ systems simultaneously. Death within days to weeks following this progression corresponds to a received radiation dose in the range of 4 to 8 gray, which is within the lethal range for humans without immediate medical intervention. The survivor who lost his vision but did not die is consistent with radiation-induced ocular damage, which occurs at lower doses than the doses required for systemic lethality, and can affect survivors of radiation exposure who received insufficient dose for whole-body lethality but sufficient dose for ocular damage. The luminous dust coating every surface, the sahar-dala that shines, matches the appearance and behavior of radioactive fallout particles, microscopic material ejected into the atmosphere by a high-energy event and deposited on surfaces as it settles. The dalakur, the brightness combined with wrongness that the watchers described through the ventilation shafts, is consistent with the atmospheric ionization that occurs in the aftermath of a nuclear-scale detonation, which produces changes in atmospheric optical properties detectable as altered light quality for a period following the event. The copper color of the Tigris corresponds to oxidation effects on river sediment produced by intense radiation exposure affecting the chemical composition of suspended particles. This symptom progression does not match any other documented natural disaster. Volcanic fallout produces respiratory symptoms as the primary presentation. Impact events produce trauma, fire, and long-term agricultural collapse through atmospheric cooling, not acute radiation sickness with a specific symptom sequence. Plague and disease produce different timelines and different symptom patterns. The sequence described in the tablet, burning skin, followed by vomiting, followed by rapid systemic failure, followed by death within days, with luminous dust on surfaces and altered light quality, appears in modern medical literature in one context. It was documented for the first time by modern science in August 1945, when physicians examined the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The private conclusion of the four scholars, which none of them committed to writing publicly, was recorded in a communication that subsequently became visible. The Sumerians may have documented a phenomenon that human civilization did not produce until 1945. The suppression that followed, al-Hashimi completed his transliteration in January 2022 and shared it with 3 colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. A preliminary paper was prepared and submitted to the Journal of Near Eastern Studies in March of that year. It was returned without review. In June 2022, the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities reclassified the tablet as Restricted Access Category 2. This is the same classification level assigned to the Warq of Oz, one of Iraq's most significant national treasures. For a tablet with no publicly assigned catalog number, this is an unusual level of restriction. Al-Hashimi was informed that further work on the tablet would require ministerial approval from a committee that meets twice a year. His photographs of the tablet were requested to be deleted from all personal and institutional devices. The tablet has never been assigned a public catalog number. The transliteration exists only in the private files of the 4 scholars who have read it. The communication between the 4 scholars following the classification decision was not publicly accessible, but what can be reconstructed from subsequent events indicates significant disagreement about how to proceed. The University of Pennsylvania colleague wanted to pursue joint publication. The SOAS colleague asked for high-resolution photographs before making any commitment. The Munich colleague went silent for 6 weeks and then responded that publication would be premature. None of them have spoken publicly. The tablet is in Baghdad. Its catalog number has never been assigned. Its transliteration has never been submitted for peer review. 3 questions. The tablet does not answer. The scribe who wrote this tablet was doing his job. He was an administrative professional recording an event using the same structured format and precise vocabulary that Sumerian scribes applied to grain shipments and temple inventories. He counted the people. He listed the supplies. He timed the phases. He described the symptoms. He recorded the outcome. He did not editorialize. He did not interpret. He did not speculate about causes. This restraint, which is entirely consistent with the professional norms of Sumerian administrative writing, leaves 3 questions open that the tablet raises but makes no attempt to answer. The first question is what produced a phenomenon, matching the clinical presentation of acute radiation sickness in a civilization that existed 4,000 years before the Trinity nuclear test. The tablet describes the symptoms with the precision of a trained observer and the neutrality of an administrative record. It does not explain the source. The second question is who warned the scouts with enough lead time for a 3-phase organized evacuation of 90,000 people. The watchers who saw first sent a warning. The warning arrived early enough to conduct a complete household census, assign 90,000 people to specific sections of the underground network, transfer 7.5 million liters of grain and corresponding quantities of water, livestock, oil, seed, and tools, and then move the entire population underground in an organized sequence. This is not the response to a surprise attack. This is the execution of a prepared plan triggered by a warning that came early enough to allow complete preparation. The third question is the most significant. If the underground infrastructure described in the tablet was pre-built and pre-provisioned, maintained and ready for use before this event occurred, how many times had something like this happened before? The phrase sealed house beneath the earth implies permanence and prior construction. The 17 separate sealed entrances across the Lagash region imply a network built at scale over time, not improvised in response to a single threat. The question of whether this infrastructure was maintained for generations against a recurring threat that the inhabitants of Lagash knew might return has no answer in the surviving text. A sealed clay tablet opened in 2021 described a radiation event recorded 4,000 years ago, long before modern science. Scholars reportedly translated it, then stayed silent. The original remains in Baghdad, locked away with its warnings. Subscribe now and stay with us for what comes next.